Welcome, you're watching Kaleidoscope Srilanka Live News Capsule. Verite Research recently established a governance and anti-corruption research division stemming from the backdrop of widespread and systemic corruption in Sri Lanka and the pressing need for reform and accountability. Headed by Sankhitha Gunaratne, the GAC division will leverage research to provide guidance on navigating complex governance challenges and also the shaping of both sectoral and general anti-corruption solutions. Sankhitha has been on the board of the Ankar Coalition, the Deputy Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka, and worked in company and tax law. And she's on the show today. Sankhitha, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me, sir.
Now, how will this research division that you're head of contribute towards shaping an environment of governance and anti-corruption in Sri Lanka, given that it is actually the elephant in the room? No one wants to talk about it, no one wants to deal with it, but we know it's all widespread and very systemic.
Exactly. So I find a clue in exactly what you said, Savithri, because Sri Lanka's anti-corruption discourse centers around how widespread it is, how prevalent it is, how systemic it is, but we tend to have a lack of research grounding in what we say. So that's exactly what we're hoping to do through the Governance and Anti-Corruption Unit at Verite Research that we're setting up. If you look at the crisis that Sri Lanka is going through right now, we find that the root cause for the crisis was actually in a governance crisis. It's framed as an economic crisis, but it's in reality a governance crisis. So that's what we're hoping to address through this. If you look at even the IMF's governance diagnostic assessment that they did for Sri Lanka, which incidentally is the first that they did in Asia, it's the first time they've done it in Asia, that also recognizes that Sri Lanka's corruption vulnerabilities are macro-critical. Right? So even in a recent special issues report, they have shown the available indexes, but when looking at corruption, the research findings are not too specific to Sri Lanka. We have qualitative research, we have sectoral research, but there is a lot of work to be done around mapping what exactly happens, what loopholes are used to subvert the system, exactly what feeds this machine of corruption, of grand corruption that has been created in Sri Lanka.
So it has been a gradual process of corruption that Sri Lanka has faced, and it has gone into the big league now. What do you think your findings would do to actually get the message out that this is not how it should be?
One of the main things that we need to focus on is in pushing for transparency across the board. If you look at the different sectors in the country, we have the private sector, the public sector, the political sector, and then we have civil society, the citizens. All of them would benefit more from having information out there, how decisions are made, how procurement awards are given, who owns assets in this country, who are the politically exposed persons who are vulnerable to corruption in Sri Lanka. So there's an entire infrastructure that needs to function well for us to be able to address the problem. As you said, corruption is in the grand corruption levels. So that's widespread, high level or high value corruption. So for us to be able to do that, we need to have more transparency. So pushing for reform that encourages and delivers on transparency is something that is really important. And then we need to take that information that is put out there through mechanisms like the new asset declaration system that's supposed to come out. We need to use the information to analyze what's going on, to look at trends of corruption, and then use that information to begin addressing the problem of corruption. One size-fits-all approaches tend to not work. We need to look at specific sectors. If you even look at the IMF's governance diagnostic assessment, it has specifically asked for Sri Lanka to introduce anti-corruption mechanisms within our revenue-generating agencies. That would mean customs, that would mean the Inland Revenue Department. So we need to have a sectoral approach to addressing corruption as well.
What is the cost to a citizen with this corruption and governance that is bad?
One is to look at the recent economic crisis that Sri Lanka went through. We have had the Supreme Court actually determine that a few individuals were responsible for the economic crisis. Now, and it shows that the economic crisis, again, going back to my first point, was not really driven by an economic crisis or an external factor or COVID-19, but by a governance crisis. The impact of corruption in that sense was almost quantifiably visible during the crisis, and we still continue to experience that, whatever we might be told. Often, corruption is referred to as white-collar crime, something that happens behind closed doors. So the impact you feel is not really felt. You can't see that. The perpetrator of the corruption often doesn't understand the impact of the corruption. It's just like you're benefiting out of a large pot of money that's available, and no one is really watching the pot.
You've had extensive experience, involvement in governance-related organizations, including civil society, and you sat on the board of the UNCAC coalition. Where do you think we should start putting in best practices so that we can ensure its implementation?
I want to highlight some of the successes of this. Now, for about 20 years, civil society organizations, political parties, media activists fought for a right to information law for Sri Lanka. And now we have what is ranked as the 4th best right to information act in the world on paper, on the ranking of laws. But also in terms of implementation, we're not doing too badly. We're doing quite well in terms of the Right to Information Commission ordering pro-disclosure orders in over 80% of instances. Right? So the right to information is working. There are ways in which we can, as I said before, push for transparency, and that push continues. Now, the asset declarations, that was a campaign that lasted 6-7 years, asking for asset declarations of high-level public officials, politicians, to be made publicly available. So that fight has begun and has culminated in that being legalized or required legally through the Anti-Corruption Act that was passed in September last year. So to your question of where do we start, it has started. And even if you look at the protests that happened in 2022, that was also coming to a head, in a sense, of the fight against corruption. That was when citizens said, enough, we need to do something about this. So there are so many ways in which you can fight corruption. But if you ask for specifics of what needs to be done immediately, we see that in response to its own commitments to the IMF, that the government has begun putting out information about large-scale tenders. They have committed to putting up tenders of over 1 billion rupees on a platform, on a government online platform. But if you look at it, we see that the information is incomplete, even though the IMF seems to have given Sri Lanka a free pass by saying that this commitment is met. The information is incomplete. There is not enough information on each tender, award that is put out. So there needs to be, we need to keep pushing for the quality of information to be higher when that is put out. We have, Sri Lanka has committed to creating a beneficial ownership register. What does that mean? What that means is that when you see a company, you don't only see the front of the company, but you're able to determine who the ultimate human owner of the company is, who truly benefits from that. We already have a roadmap through the IMF's governance diagnostic and the civil society governance diagnostic that Verite Research was also part of creating. We have a roadmap for reform. So we need to keep pushing for that, but because whether we like it or not, in this moment, because there's so much attention on Sri Lanka and because of the crisis and because the IMF is in the room and even the private investors who have bought Sri Lanka's sovereign bonds, for example, are keen and are looking at Sri Lanka, we have this moment where all of this has come to a head and we have a reform moment. So whether we like it or not, the reform is going to go forward. So there is a lot to be done in ensuring that this reform is meaningful, that this reform is not just done to tick a box, and that it is indeed good reform.
Let's hope it works out.
Yes.
Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe, like and follow us.
You focus on your goals. We will take care of the risks. Srilanka Life.